The Ghosts of Widow's Peak. Chapter 1. The Mountain's Warning. Widow's Peak, nestled deep within the North Cascades of Washington State, is not a mountain for the unprepared. At just over 8,000 feet, it doesn't boast the same staggering height as its neighbors, but its reputation is far more sinister. It stands apart, a solitary spire of granite and ancient timber, perpetually shrouded in a crown of mist. The local Salish tribes have a name for it that translates to the place where the sky weeps, a name earned by the sudden, treacherous fogs that can swallow the mountain whole in minutes, even on the clearest of days. In the autumn of 1976, long after the logging companies had abandoned the area, Widow's Peak had become a whispered legend among serious hikers and climbers, a test of skill and nerve. The old logging trails had mostly vanished, reclaimed by thick undergrowth, and the only reliable path to the summit was a grueling, unmarked route known only to a few. Ethan, a former journalist from Seattle, was one of those few, or so he thought. He sought solitude, a way to scrub the city's noise and his own failures from his mind. He'd spent the last year poring over old topographical maps and reading yellowed newspaper clippings about the mountain's history. He was prepared. His rucksack was packed with professional gear, enough provisions for a week, and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He parked his Ford pickup at the end of a barely there gravel road. The air was already thin and sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. A single, weathered signpost stood crookedly at the trailhead. The words Widow's Peak Trail were barely visible beneath a coat of moss. Below it, someone had crudely carved a warning into the wood. "Don't go alone," Ethan scoffed, a small cloud of condensation puffing from his lips. That was the whole point. He adjusted the straps on his pack and took his first step into the deep, cathedral-like silence of the forest. The only sound was the crunch of his boots on fallen needles. The towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks formed a dense canopy, plunging the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. Sunlight struggled to pierce through, dappling the ground in shifting, ghostly patterns. It was beautiful, but it was an oppressive kind of beauty. After a few hours of steady climbing, he reached Miller's Crossing, the last outpost of civilization. It wasn't a town, merely a single, dilapidated ranger station, manned by an old-timer named George. George sat on the porch, whittling a piece of wood, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. A plume of smoke curled from the station's stone chimney. He looked up as Ethan approached, his eyes, pale blue and sharp, taking in Ethan's modern gear with a look of weary skepticism. "Headed up?" George asked, his voice raspy, like stones grinding together. "That's the plan," Ethan replied, trying to sound cheerful. "To the old fire lookout near the summit." George stopped whittling. He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dirt. "Lookout's been abandoned for 30 years. Nobody's been up there since Silas Blackwood. You know that story?" "I've read a little about it," Ethan said, though he'd read everything he could find. Silas Blackwood was the last fire warden, a man who, according to official reports, simply walked off the mountain in the winter of '47 and was never seen again. "Reports ain't the story," George grumbled. "The story is what the mountain does to a man when he's alone for too long. People hear things up there, see things in the fog, shadows that move when they shouldn't. The mountain, it gets inside your head. It finds the cracks and pulls them wide open." Ethan forced a smile. "I appreciate the warning, George, but I'll be fine. I'm just looking for some peace and quiet." "Ain't no peace on Widow's Peak," the old ranger said, turning his gaze towards the shrouded summit. "Only quiet, and that quiet is heavy. It's a listening quiet. You be careful it doesn't listen you to death." Dismissing the old man's words as local folklore, Ethan nodded his thanks and continued on his way. But as he climbed higher and the ranger station disappeared behind him, George's words echoed in his mind. A listening quiet. He shook his head, annoyed with himself. It was just a mountain. Chapter 2. The Lookout Tower. The ascent was more difficult than the map suggested. The trail became a vague suggestion, a path that Ethan had to rediscover with every step, pushing through thorny bushes and clambering over moss-slicked boulders. The air grew colder, and the vibrant green of the lower forest gave way to the stark gray of rock and the hardy, twisted forms of subalpine firs. The world shrank around him. There was only the burn in his legs, the sound of his own breathing, and the immense, unnerving silence of the mountain. It was late afternoon when the fog rolled in. It didn't drift. It surged up from the valleys below like a silent, gray tide, consuming everything. One moment, Ethan could see for miles across the rugged Cascade peaks. The next, his world was a 10-foot circle of visibility. The temperature plummeted. The dampness seeped into his jacket, and a profound sense of isolation began to press in on him. He could be the only person left on Earth. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the edge of his thoughts. He forced it down. He was an experienced outdoorsman. He checked his compass, took a deep breath, and pushed onward. It was in that disorienting, white-walled world that he stumbled upon it. A dark, skeletal shape looming out of the mist. The Fire Lookout Tower. It stood on a rocky outcrop, a single square room perched atop a 30-foot-high wooden scaffold. The wood was gray and weathered, streaked with green algae. A rickety-looking staircase spiraled up one side. It looked like a forgotten relic, a monument to a time long past. A wave of relief washed over Ethan. He had made it. This would be his sanctuary. He climbed the creaking stairs, each step groaning in protest under his weight. He half expected the structure to collapse, but it held. The door to the lookout room was stiff, but it opened with a loud shriek of rusted hinges. The inside was a time capsule. A thick layer of dust covered everything. A single, metal-framed bed with a rotted mattress was pushed against one wall. In the center of the room sat a wooden table and a single chair, positioned to face the large, wraparound windows. A small, pot-bellied stove stood cold in a corner, a rusty pipe leading up through the ceiling. On the table, he found an old kerosene lamp and a small, tin box, the kind used for storing documents. Ethan dropped his pack with a heavy thud. He worked quickly, driven by the encroaching cold of the evening. He swept the worst of the dust and grime out of the room, unrolled his sleeping bag onto the bed frame, and set up his small camp stove. As darkness fell, the fog outside thickened into an impenetrable wall of white. The wind began to howl, rattling the window panes in their frames. It was a lonely, mournful sound. After a simple meal of freeze-dried stew, Ethan lit the old kerosene lamp. Its warm, flickering glow pushed back the oppressive darkness, creating a small, cozy bubble of light. It was then that his curiosity turned to the tin box on the table. It was locked, but the metal was old and weak. Using the tip of his knife, he pried the rusted clasp open. Inside, nestled in the bottom, was a single leather-bound journal. The cover was warped and stained by damp, but the pages within seemed mostly preserved. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat, an elegant cursive script from a different era. October 3rd, 1947. Silas Blackwood. First day of my post. The view from this tower is like sitting on God's own porch. You can see the world from up here. The silence is absolute. It is a welcome change from the noise of the war and the cities. This is a place where a man can finally think. Ethan felt a strange chill, a sense of intrusion, of reading something not meant for him. But he couldn't stop. He was alone, trapped by the storm, and this journal was a voice from the past, another man who had sat in this very room, in this very chair, surrounded by the same suffocating fog. Chapter 3. A Voice in the Dark. The wind howled relentlessly through the night, a living thing clawing at the tower. Ethan lay in his sleeping bag, listening to the old structure groan and sway. Sleep wouldn't come. He lit the lamp again and picked up Silas Blackwood's journal. He turned the page. October 10th, 1947. The fog has been here for 3 days. It blankets everything. I have not seen the sun. At night, the world ceases to exist beyond these windows. The silence I once found peaceful is changing. It has a weight to it now. Sometimes, when the wind dies down, I think I can hear things, whispers, just at the edge of hearing. Like the forest itself is talking. I tell myself it's just the wind playing tricks on an old soldier's ears. Ethan paused, a shiver running down his spine. He strained his ears, listening past the wind. Was that a whisper? No, it was nothing, just the storm. He read on, his fascination now mixed with a growing sense of dread. October 19th, 1947. The supply plane was supposed to come yesterday. The storm must be keeping them away. My rations are running low. The isolation is a physical presence now. I find myself talking aloud just to hear a voice that isn't the wind. Last night, I saw something. In a brief break in the fog, I looked down towards the tree line. There was movement, a shape, tall and thin, darker than the shadows around it. It stood perfectly still for a moment, and then the fog closed in again. Probably just a bear, a trick of the light. But it didn't look like a bear. Ethan's heart was pounding. He stood up and walked to the window, peering out into the swirling gray abyss. He saw nothing but the reflection of his own pale face in the lamplight. He felt a sudden, irrational fear that something was out there, looking back at him. He backed away from the window, his breath catching in his throat. This was stupid. He was letting an old man's diary get to him. He forced himself to continue reading, as if finishing the story would somehow break the spell. The entries grew shorter, more frantic. The neat cursive began to degenerate into a desperate scrawl. October 25th, 1947. They're always watching. I see them at the edge of the trees whenever the fog thins. They don't have faces, just long, crooked shapes. They don't move like men. They glide between the trees. At night, the whispers are closer. They're calling my name. The wind carries their voices. Silas, Silas. They want me to join them. They say it's peaceful in the fog. No more memories. No more pain. November 2nd, 1947. I've barricaded the door, but it won't matter. They can walk through walls. They are the mountain. They are the fog. They are the quiet. I haven't slept in days. If I close my eyes, I see their shapes. They are patient. They know I can't stay in this tower forever. My food is gone. The cold is seeping into my bones. The last entry was almost illegible. The words scrawled across the page at a sharp angle. November 5th, 1947. The sun came out today, the first time in weeks. It's so beautiful. The fog has receded into the valleys. I can see the world again. They are gone. The whispers are silent. But I know they are just waiting. I can't stay here. I can't go down. I heard them one last time this morning. A clear whisper, right outside the window. They said there is a place for me. A quiet place, among the trees. I'm going out to find it. It's better than waiting for the fog to come back. That was the end. The remaining pages were blank. Ethan slammed the journal shut, his hands trembling. A profound and terrible coldness filled the room, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Silas Blackwood hadn't just walked off the mountain. He had been lured away, driven mad by isolation and fear, and by what? Suddenly, a loud scratching sound came from the door. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Ethan froze, his blood turning to ice. It was impossible. He was 30 feet in the air. He snatched his heavy flashlight from his pack, his mind screaming, "It's an animal, a bird, a branch, blown by the wind." He crept towards the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. The scratching stopped. Silence returned, deeper and more terrifying than before. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening. There was nothing but the ever-present moan of the wind. He didn't sleep at all that night. He sat in the chair, the flashlight beam aimed at the door, waiting for the sun to rise. Chapter 4. The Listening Quiet. Dawn arrived not with a sunrise, but with a slow, grudging shift from black to a deep, featureless gray. The fog was thicker than ever, pressing against the windows like a physical weight. The world was gone. The tower was an island floating in a sea of nothing. Ethan felt a crushing sense of despair. He was trapped. The storm showed no signs of breaking, and the thought of descending the mountain in this visibility was suicide. He was stuck here, in Silas Blackwood's tomb, with the dead man's words echoing in his head. All day, he paced the small room like a caged animal. He tried to read his own book, but the words blurred together. He tried to busy himself with his gear, cleaning and organizing it, but his hands shook too much. Every creak of the old tower, every gust of wind that rattled the glass, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see a faceless shape emerge from the mist. The silence was the worst part. When the wind died down, the quiet that remained was what George had described, a listening quiet. It felt active, malevolent. He started to hear things, or thought he did. The soft whisper of his name, woven into the wind's cry, Ethan. A faint, rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from directly beneath the floorboards. He began to talk to himself, his voice loud and jarring in the stillness. It's the altitude. It's cabin fever. It's just the old building settling. He recited facts, tried to ground himself in logic, but the fear was a living entity, growing in the corners of the room. He found himself drawn back to the journal. He reread Silas's words, and this time, they didn't feel like the ravings of a madman. They felt like a prophecy. He saw the same paranoia taking root in his own mind. He started to understand how the solitude could peel away the layers of sanity. That afternoon, he saw it. He was staring blankly out a south-facing window when the fog swirled, thinning for just a second. Down below, at the edge of the rocky clearing, stood a figure. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its limbs too long, its form indistinct, as if it were woven from the fog and shadows itself. It was perfectly still. It had no face he could discern, just a dark void where a head should be. It was exactly as Silas had described. Ethan's breath hitched. He didn't scream. He couldn't move. He just stared, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was there. As he watched, mesmerized by horror, a second figure glided into view beside the first, and then a third. They stood there, silent and unmoving, their featureless heads tilted slightly upwards, as if they were looking right at him, looking right into him. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the curtain of fog closed, and they were gone. Ethan stumbled back from the window, a strangled sob escaping his lips. He fell to his knees, gasping for air. It was real, all of it. George's warning, Silas's journal, the whispers. The mountain was haunted, and he was trapped at its heart. Chapter 5. The Final Entry. The last vestiges of Ethan's rational mind crumbled. The barrier between his reality and Silas Blackwood's nightmare dissolved completely. The past and present were no longer separate. He was Silas. He was Ethan. They were two men in the same room, separated only by time, haunted by the same phantoms. He didn't try to sleep that night. He sat at the small table, the journal open in front of him, the kerosene lamp casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The shadows themselves seemed to writhe and twist, taking on familiar, elongated shapes. The whispers were constant now, a chorus of voices just outside the glass, calling to him, promising him an end to the fear, an end to the loneliness. Join us, Ethan. It's so quiet down here. You don't have to be alone anymore. He picked up his own pen, and his hand shaking violently, he turned to the first blank page after Silas's last entry. He didn't know why he was doing it. It was a compulsion, a need to add his own voice to the tower's terrible history. His own handwriting was almost a perfect match for Silas's final, frantic scrawl. November 10th, 1976. He wrote, "My name is Ethan. I think. The name doesn't feel right anymore. I am the man in the tower. The storm has not ended. Or maybe it has, and this is all that's left. The gray, the quiet." He paused, listening. The scratching sound had returned, but it wasn't at the door anymore. It was everywhere. On the walls, on the roof, on the underside of the floor. It was the sound of 100 sharp fingernails drawing lines around his sanctuary. "They don't hide anymore," he continued writing, the pen digging into the fragile paper. "I see them all the time. They stand in the fog and they wait. They don't have to break down the door. They know I will open it. Silas was wrong to be afraid. They aren't here to hurt me. They are just lonely, like me." A strange sense of calm settled over him. The terror had burned itself out, leaving behind a hollow, serene acceptance. The whispers no longer sounded threatening. They sounded like a welcome. "The sun is coming out. I can see it. A pale, white light is beginning to glow through the fog. It's so beautiful. They are telling me it's time to come out. It's time to find my quiet place. The door is so heavy, but I think I can open it." He wrote one last sentence, his final testament. "It's not a bad place to be. You can see the whole world from up here, and you are never, ever alone." Ethan put the pen down. He neatly closed the journal and placed it back in the tin box, closing the lid. He stood up, his movements calm and deliberate. He walked to the door, no longer afraid of the sounds on the other side. He reached for the heavy iron bolt that Silas had used to barricade it. Outside, the wind had finally died. A profound and absolute silence had fallen over Widow's Peak. The fog, thick and white and patient, waited.